The Master, I pray for you. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Book 3rd, Supernormal Powers, which of course differs from supernatural, because there is no such thing as supernatural. There's just psychic and even spiritual realities that we can't, are things about this physical reality that we presume to be the case. Oh, this must be impossible. Then it turns out not to be impossible. No matter how rare or unreproducible something is, doesn't mean that something doesn't happen. But the 5 indirect aids to yoga have been described. Fixed attention is now to be described. 1. Binding the mind stuff to a place is fixed attention. Binding the mind stuff only insofar as it is a fluctuation to the navel, or to the heart lotus, or to the light within the head, or to the tip of the nose, or to the tip of the tongue, or to other places, is the same kind, or to an external object. This is fixed attention. Say, you don't get rid of the chakras. You just, I'm at the heart chakra. Well, I'm only at the chakra of the bowels. You're at the chakra of what now? At least he's being honest, right? Not this guy, some other people. The first and second books described concentration and the means thereto. In the third book, the supernormal powers are to be described, which are reasons for propagation of belief and which are favorable to this concentration and its means. These supernormal powers are to be accomplished by constraints, samyama, and constraint is the combination of fixed attention and of contemplation and of concentration. So inasmuch as these 3 are the means of accomplishing the supernormal powers, who wants to be normal anyways, right? We have here a mention of these 3 in order to make known the particular quality of each as being direct aids to yoga, and as contracted with the 5 which are indirect aids. And with regard to these 3, fixed attention and contemplation and concentration are in relation of cause and effect, and the serial order of causes and effects is specified. Therefore, this order is followed in order of the statements. Accordingly, fixed attention is the first to be characterized. So he says, 1. Binding the mind stuff to a place is fixed attention. He describes a place belonging to oneself by the words, to the navel. By the words, other places of the same kind, we must understand the palate and so forth. The binding is a relation. He describes an external place by the words, are to an external. And with an external object, the mind stuff as such cannot have a relation. So it is said, only insofar as it is a fluctuation. In other words, only so far as it is a perception. On this point also there is Purana, having mastered his breath by restraint of breath, and his organs by withdrawal of the senses. He should make a localization of the mind stuff upon some auspicious support. Auspicious supports are external. Hran, Yagarbha, and Vasava, and Prajapati, and so forth. And this has also been said. The incarnate form of the Exalted One leaves one without desire for any other support. This should be understood to be fixed attention. When the mind stuff is fixed upon this form, and what this incarnate form of Hari, on which one should ponder, let that be heard by thee, O ruler of men. Fixed attention is not possible without something on which to fix it. His face is calm, his eye like the lovely lotus petal, his cheek is beautiful, the expanse of his broad forehead is resplendent. With the light of thought, the charming ornament of the earring is placed under the lotus of his ears, which are equal in size. His neck is marked with 3 lines, like a shell of the sea. His great broad chest is marked by the Shrivata, Trivatsa, his belly has a deep navel and broken folds. He has 8 long arms as Vishnu, 4 arms, his thighs are evenly placed, his excellent lotus feet are arranged as a mystical diagram. Now, when we talk about divinity, we don't have to, we can certainly, like we're taking all these other layers off, let's do that with our idea of divinity. Gender, forms, any other limit you can prescribe to that. I mean, but it's limiting to say that God is good. Well, not quite. But anyways, he is like Brahma, with a stainless yellow garment, and is adorned with a diadem, and with the charming armlets and bracelets. He has Charanga, Vishnu's bow, and the discus, and the mace, and the sword, and the conch, and the rosary upon him. Vishnu, let this yogin ponder, and lost in him concentrate with his own mind until, O king, the fixed attention becomes firmly fixed upon him only. While performing this, or while doing as he wills some other action, wherein his mind does not wander, he should then deem this fixed attention to be perfected. See, because we manifest. We either refer to, or we even manifest certain qualities. We don't become a god in that sense. Oh, I love, so therefore I'm the god of love. No, it doesn't work that way. Or here's this object, I understand its mystical importance, like the trident right over there. I can't quite reach this angle. 2, focusedness of the presented idea upon that place is contemplation. The focusedness of the presented idea upon the object to be contemplated in that place, in other words, the stream of presented ideas, is of like quality, unaffected by any other presented idea. He characterizes the contemplation which is to be affected by fixed attention. 2. Focusedness of the presented idea upon that place is contemplation. Focusedness is singleness of intent. The comment is easy. On this point also, there is a Purana. Well, Purana is like an epic, so obviously it's more than just this quote, right? An uninterrupted succession of presented ideas, single in intent upon his form, without desire for anything else. That, O king, is contemplation. It is brought about by the first 6 aids to yoga. 3. This same contemplation, shining forth in consciousness as the intended object and nothing more, and, as it were, emptied of itself, is concentration. When the contemplation only shines forth in consciousness, in the form of the object to be contemplated, and so is, as it were, empty of itself, insofar as it becomes identical with the presented idea as such, then, by fusing itself with the nature of the object to be contemplated, it is said to be concentration. He gives the characteristics of this concentration, which is to be attained by concentration in the Sutra 3. The same concentration shines forth in consciousness in the form of the object to be contemplated. Signify that it shines forth in the form of the object to be contemplated and not in the form of its contemplation. The same shining forth as the intended object and nothing more, as it were, emptied of itself, that is concentration, is this 3rd sutra. Again, that is why he says empty. An objector asks, if it be empty, how could the object to be contemplated appear? In reply, he says, as it were, he gives the reason for the same in the words, by fusing itself with the nature of the object to be contemplated. On this point also there is a Purana. The knowing of this same Vishnu is he when free from 2-termed relations. Kalpana is a contemplation of the contemplation by the central organ. This is terminated concentration. A two-termed relation, kalpana, is a distinction between the contemplation and the object to be contemplated. The concentration is free from this. This is the meaning. Kitchidavja. Ketchidvaja. After having described to the Kandikya 8 aids to yoga, sums them up by saying, the soul, Kshetrajna, has this means. Thinking is the means. It is animate. When thinking has completed its task of release, it has done what it had to do and ceases. These same 3, fixed attention and contemplation and concentration in one, are constraint. We think of self-realization, self-actualization, and self-mastery. Well, self-mastery would be constraint. Self-responsibility would be the Luciferian values. But we think of, there was a cartoon I saw and I didn't get quite right, but I'm not sure how I would get it. But it's supposed to be a bunch of Greek guys, right? And they're like, it's the origin of philosophy. Let's think about stuff, and think about thinking about stuff. And some guys are going to need a lot more scrolls, and then of course there's the thinking about the stuff, and anyways. 4. The 3 in one are constraint. When having a single object, the 3 means are called constraint. So the technical term now laid down in this system for these 3 is constraint. These 3, fixed attention and contemplation and concentration, are used in many places as one. It would be labored to enunciate each time the respective and technical terms. So, for brevity's sake, he introduces a sutra which lays down a technical term, Paribhasa Sutra, by saying these same 4. The 3 in one are constraint. He explains the sutra by saying, when having a single object, he removes a doubt as to whether these 3 are the naturally expressed meaning of the word constraint by saying, for these 3. The system, Tantra, is that authoritative book, Shastra, by which yoga is systemized or expounded. So I've explained before, but Tantra and yoga, the left-hand path and the right-hand path, are so very, very much alike, and those of the right hand and those of the left hand, that may be what these people are meaning, but let's say, ooh, the left-hand path, you don't know about the left-hand path, you're cutting yourself short. It's like, yoga and Tantra are so much the same. Same thing with other things. The black magic is doing, Aleister Crowley, and black magic is doing that which is not in accord with doing your true will, your devotion and development as it really should be, your, high magic, so that definition of black magic. But again, black magic can get different terms. But anyways, people like to play games with terms to make themselves feel special and all that. In this system means in what belongs to this system. And the passages where the word constraint is used are such as 3:16. Oh, book 3:16. Okay. So we're another 11 verses after the next one. A result of constraint is upon the 3 mutations. 5. As a result of mastering this constraint, there follows the shining forth of insight. As a result of mastering this constraint, there follows the shining forth of concentrated insight. See, Luciferian bringing the light. So, realizing it for yourself and exhibiting it. Not in some, oh, I want to be everybody's savior. No, that's not it. Just in proportion as constraint enters the stable state, in that proportion, the concentrated insight becomes clear. He mentions the result of success in constraint, for which the means of attainment is practice, by saying, 5. As a result of mastering this constraint, there follows the shining forth or insight. The shining forth of insight is due to the fact that it remains in the clear stream of the yogin who is not overcome by other ideas. The comment is easy. 6. Its application is by stages. The application of it, that is, the constraint, is to that stage, which is the next stage already mastered. For by overlapping the next stage without having first mastered the lower stages, the yogin does not gain constraint in the highest stages. If he did not gain constraint, how could he gain that shining forth of insight? Again, the constraint of one who, by the grace of the Ichara, has gained a higher stage, does not apply to such things, so is the mind stuff thinking. And other persons who are in the lower stages, why is this? Since the purpose of this has been obtained from elsewhere. Yoga is itself the only spiritual guide which can show that this stage is next to that stage. How is this? Because it has been said to be thus. By yoga, yoga must be known. Yoga increaseth yoga's store. He who for yoga care hath shown, in yoga rest for evermore. And so I'm not going to stop there, but okay. Say a person has memorized one of the 6,000 some odd verses. I don't remember how many verses. Yeah, they've attained a rank. 114 chapters. Say they've memorized one of those, and they want to live up to those, and they want to practice more as it goes along. And other forms of path working. Oh, well, I'm this. I can work through these issues, and as they attain to a certain stage amongst the practices, I've declared, I've become a believer, I've become a perfected, I've perfected goodness, I've this and that and the other. Well, you don't jump. You can move quickly, but you don't jump. And other path workings, some conceptual more than memorization, although that's actually the thing. It's more about what you believe and do rather than what you've memorized, although memorization and other practices are used in this. But it's not like you have to, I can't do this until I do this. I can't, most things are, spiritual systems aren't really like that. But you can certainly say, okay, I have to master this, but I'm going to review this as I go. I hope I wasn't unclear there. But when applied, in what cases can this constraint have these results? In reply, he says 6. Its application is by stages. The author of the comment particularizes the meaning of the word stage by stage of it. Its application is to that state as yet unmastered, which is next to the stage already mastered. When the reflective concentration, whose object is coarse, is mastered by constraint, the next application of constraint is to super reflective concentration, which has not been mastered yet. When this too is mastered, the application of the restraint is to deliberative concentration. Similarly, when this is mastered, the application is to super deliberative concentration. Hence, in the Purana, when the balanced state of the object, which is coarse, is perfected, then there is latter introduced that concentration of the object which is subtle, and that the various weapons and ornaments are removed. Then the wise man should ponder upon the serene form of the exalted one, without its conch shell and mace and discus and the charinga, charnga. Okay. But having its string of heads. Remember the Queen of Swords card? You cut off the false image of divinity and you cut off its head. And you bear it, I've gone beyond these images, and that's what the string of skulls is about, but most people don't get that. When the fixed attention has become stable upon this form, then he should keep in mind the form without the ornaments, especially the diadem and the armlets. The wise man should make the entity to have only one limb, and should think, I am he. Again, get rid of these forms you're associating with God, and you advance. Then after that, he should devote himself to the thought of I. But why, after having mastered a lower stage, does he master a higher stage? And why is there not a reverse process? In reply to this, he says, without having first subjected the lower stage, the yogin does not. For a man proceeding to the Ganges from Chilarada does not reach the Ganges unless he first get to Magabana, yeah. Again, of one who by the grace of the Ichvara, Ich, similar to Ish, master, aware, that sort of thing. We're referring to it in the sense of God here. Why does he say this? Because the purpose of this, the success in the higher stage which comes next, has been obtained from elsewhere, that is, from the devotion to the Ichvara. For when an act has its actions finished, then a means of attaining, which does not produce anything in particular, falls outside the function of what can be called a means. The objector says, this may be true. It is known in a general way, agamata, what the different subordinated stages are. But how is there a knowledge of which comes after the other? In reply to this, he says, this stage, yoga which has been previously mastered, is the reason for proceeding to the thinking of the yoga which comes after. The passage is to be understood by supposing that a state is equivalent to a yoga which contains a state. 7. The three are direct aids in comparison with the previous 5. The same 3, fixed attention and contemplation and concentration, are direct aids to conscious concentration in comparison with the previous means, the 5, beginning with the abstentions. I said that 7, the 3 direct aids in comparison with the previous. But why is constraint applied in various places, and not to the other 5 aids to yoga, although all, without distinction, are aids to yoga? In reply, he says, 7, the 3 are direct aids in comparison with the previous. These 3 means of attainment, inasmuch as their object is the same of the object to the yoga to be accomplished, are direct aids, but abstentions and the other 4 are not so. They are therefore indirect aids. These 3 means of attainment are direct aids only with reference to yoga, consciousness of objects, but not to consciousness of an object. For since yoga and not consciousness of an object is seedless and has no object, it does not have the same object as these 3. And since after these has been restricted for a long time, unconscious yoga arises subsequent to higher passionlessness, consisting in the undisturbed calm of perception, another name of which is the higher limit of conscious yoga. So he says the same 3. 8. Even these 3 are indirect aids to seedless concentration. Even these, the 3 direct means of attainment, are indirect aids to seedless yoga. Why is this? Since this latter occurs even when these are absent. Well, we're creations, so therefore we didn't start things, so everything is seeded, right? 8. Even these are indirect aids to seedless. But we should get beyond, we use the body, we use the mind, but we can get beyond these things as such. These are indirect aids to seedless. Hence, that which determines the relation of direct aid to this is sameness of objects, and not a mere sequence. For this sequence, insofar as it might exist in the case of devotion to the Ishvara, which is an indirect aid, would make the application of direct aid too wide, vyabhichara, if this is established, even over wideness of the characterization, which would include mere sequence, could not apply to this constraint. Therefore, it is still less probable that this constraint would be a direct aid to concentration, not consciousness of an object. To show that this is so, it is said, since the latter occurs even when these are absent. Now, since during the restricted moments of the mind stuff, the changes of the aspects guna are unstable, of what sort at those times is the mutation of the mind stuff? We're going to reach 10? Maybe we'll reach 10. Let's see. 9. When there is a becoming invisible of the subliminal impression of the emergence and a becoming visible of the subliminal impression of restriction, and the mutation of restriction is inseparably connected with the mind stuff in its period of restriction. The subliminal impressions of emergence are external objects, dharma, of mind stuff. Since they do not consist of presented ideas, they are not restricted when presented ideas are restricted. The subliminal impressions of restriction are also external aspects of mind stuff. When these two states of mind stuff become visible or become invisible, that is, when the subliminal impressions of emergence are withdrawing and the subliminal impressions of restriction are being brought into place, the period of restriction is inseparably connected with the mind stuff. Accordingly, the mutation of restriction is this periodical truncation of subliminal impressions of single mind stuff, because then the mind stuff has nothing but subliminal impressions, and has been explained, Book 1:18, with reference to the concentration of restriction, and with the intent to give information here about the three mutations which are made use of in the Sutra 3:16. As a result of the constraint upon the three mutations, he asks, incidentally, to the topic of seedless concentration, now, in the case of emergence and of yoga consciousness of objects, since there is an experience of an accumulation of various very clear mutations, there has been no introduction of the question, but in the case of restriction of mutation is not experienced. Furthermore, it cannot be said that because it is not experienced, it does not exist. For inasmuch as mind stuff is made up of three aspects guna, and since also the changes of the aspects are unstable, an absence of mutation, even for a moment, is impossible. The answer to the question is the Sutra 9. Emergence, mutation of restrictions, in comparison with concentration unconscious of any object. Consciousness concentrated is emergence. Restriction is that which restricts. It is undisturbed calm, a perception, and is also the higher passionlessness. There is a becoming visible and a becoming invisible of these two subliminal impressions of emergence and the subliminal impression of restriction. That is to say, the becoming invisible of the subliminal impression of emergence and the becoming visible of the subliminal impression of restriction. The mind stuff, which is the substance in the period of restriction, that is, the occasion of restriction, is inseparably connected with both of these states. For the mind stuff, as substance, whether in the conscious or unconscious state, does not differ in itself insofar as subliminal impressions become visible or become invisible within it. And Bajector says, just as latter hindrances based upon undifferentiated consciousness, avidya, cease, where undifferentiated consciousness ceases. And consequently, there is no need of further special effort to repress them. So the subliminal impressions based upon the ideas of emergence may cease at the very moment of the cessation of the emergence, and therefore the repression of them there should be no need of the subliminal impressions of restriction. With this in view, he says, the subliminal impressions of emergence, the cessation of a cause in general, is not a reason for the cessation of the effect. So that even if the weaver cease to be, there need be no cessation of the cloth. But with the cessation of that cause which is constitutive of the nature of the effect, there's a cessation of the effect. Now the other hindrances have been said to consist of undifferentiated consciousness, avidya. So, with the cessation of that undifferentiated consciousness, it is right that these hindrances should cease. But when the subliminal impression, whose essence is presented ideas, are not such, for even if the idea be restricted for a long time, we observe that a connecting recollection at the present time, and therefore, even if the presented ideas are repressed, nivritte, still an accumulation of the subliminal impressions of restriction must be restored in order to repress these subliminal impressions from presented ideas. This is the meaning. The rest is easy. 10. This mind stuff flows peaceably by reason of the subliminal impression. The opiate of the masses, right? Actually, the opiate of the masses is prescription medication now, but it used to be religion. By reason of the subliminal impression of restriction, the peaceful flow of the mind stuff requires dexterity in the application of the subliminal impressions of restriction. When these subliminal impressions become weak, the subliminal impression, which is the external aspects of restriction, is overwhelmed by the subliminal impressions which has external objects of emergence. But if there be an overwhelming abhibhava, the emergent subliminal impressions in all respects, of what source is the mutation with a powerful subliminal impression of restriction? And apply to this, he says 10. And this flows peaceably by reason of the subliminal impression. Calm flowing is a flowing of succession of restrictions only undefiled by the subliminal improvisions of emergence. Why is dexterity of subliminal impressions needed, but not ordinary subliminal impressions? The answer to this, he says, when these subliminal impressions become weak, the word these tat refers back to restriction, but those who have the reading are not overwhelmed would refer to the word these tada to emergence. Namaste. I bow for you, but I don't